in the last episode. I saw him different.
I love your song. Ebony and Ivory. That's my favorite song.
Stripes song.
Stevie Wonder is
No,
a delight.
That was like when I was in the 3rd grade.
So,
I would.
before we get into the lesson for tonight, I have a question
Sure.
from the group. Well, a
Wait,
few of us
some
are
of you were
feeling
like,
a little
wait.
bit.
Should I stop the recording?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
go.
Please do observe this for posterity.
A few of us are feeling a little scratchy about losing points on the first assignment because every point on the assignment is a percentage point of our grade. We're just wondering if there's a way to make up points for
What was the first assignment?
the planning document.
Okay.
So we're just all feeling a little bit like, whoa, I lost 3 points on this. That's 3 percentage points of my grade. That feels a little intense.
Okay.
And then for this next assignment that we worked really hard on to be working with 10 points also feels a little scratchy. I'm not trying to like judge anything you're doing. Just wanted to ask about options for maybe earning extra points back.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Well, that's a very good point, and I was hoping somebody would bring that up, because I know I graded all those things. And so give everybody the opportunity to make up points that we do in that assignment.
Thank you so much.
So that wasn't a second.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yay,
And,
I'm so glad.
I just feel this thunder.
I'm sorry I slipped
No,
over
but
here.
thank you for bringing that up, because I know it is a lot of points, right, for all these things.
Yes.
So, you know, and for me, this class is grad school, right? So I'm not really concerned about the grade here. I know you're all putting the work in.
Right.
So for me, it's more about the iterative process of you guys working through this stuff, figuring out the logic, and then putting the work in. My concern really at this point is not so much about the exercises, but making sure that you're doing things that are valuable for you and that you get something out of it, right? And so part of today's could be me streamlining and removing the other data exercise project and saying you're going to rework a new data analysis working plan that's going to be more advanced in terms of where your project is at, kind of help you make progress with the project. And I'm counseling classes the rest of the week for Wednesday, so that rather than doing that, what I'll do is on Wednesday and Thursday, I'll meet with each of you individually for an hour or half an hour. I'll talk about that more later. To talk about where you are in your project, where you are with your analysis plan, and kind of what's going on. So we'll kind of talk about some of that stuff a little bit.
Great, thank you so much.
Because I think at this point, you have the basics down, and everything you're doing should be towards your project for the class and working with your data. So that you can make most supply.
What if I realize it when I'm, like when I wrote my little abstract thing, I don't know how to do the kind of analysis. Like I didn't take structural equation or
Right.
so I don't know how to do path analysis or SEM, but that's probably what my data team. And so.
Right. So you'll have to figure out something else that you can do
Okay.
with it, right? So, and that's okay. You're not tied to anything with an abstract, so it's all right. Let me go, I guess we can jump ahead to that part of it. We'll do a little bit of refresher today on analysis.
Will the meetings be in person or via Zoom?
In person, preferably. So, so I can jump to that so we can talk about that. Actually, since you brought up that assignment, let's see, because that assignment was due 2 of those plans, right?
Right.
Okay, so if you want to make up some points for that one of those 2 plans you gave me should be for the day you're working with, correct?
Yeah.
Right? So pick the other one that you're not working with and redo that one. And I'll tell you why in a second.
Okay.
Because for our meeting here, what I'm having you do now is work on a new working data analysis plan template that's more detailed. Let me pull that template up here if I have it. Okay, and so it's the same as the earlier one, but what I want you to do is provide more detail in terms of the variables that you're actually using. And this stuff's not going to change the very top here, but really think about this my dependent variables. Here's the ones that I'm pulling. Here's how I'm combining them or not combining them. Here's how I'm coding them. Here are my independent variables. Here's the ones that I've identified that are key here. Here are my control variables. And now I want you to really match up your analytic methods to your hypotheses and your research questions and say, for this research questions, or these hypotheses, I'm going to do this particular analytic strategy, looking at this dependent variable with these independent variables. Or this other research question I'm going to do, this dependent variable and these independent variables, and here's the strategy we use to analyze that, and kind of work through that sort of stuff. What I also want you to start doing is start thinking about how you're going to look at your data, right? You now know how to run descriptive statistics. We'll talk today about bivariate analyses and kind of multivariate analyses. So start going through and say, okay, here's what I'm going to look at. Here's all the variables that I've computed, that I've transformed, that I've scaled, that I've coded in some sort of way that I've changed. And so here are my descriptors for those variables. You don't have to have all this stuff when you meet, but I want you to have a plan for what you're going to do with what variables and how you're going to lay that stuff out. I want you to look at bivariate statistics, look at your correlations, look at your crosstabs, look at your t-tests, look at your ANOVAs, just to get a sense that you show me that you know your data. I know in the next 2 days you're not going to have all of this done, but at least you can say, here are these variables, here's how I'm going to look at them, here are the comparisons that I want to make, here are the important ones that I want to look at, right? So it's about knowing your data. And then finally, with your multivariate statistics. Here's my full model. Here's how I'm going to break that model down. I'm going to look at, this dependent variable with these independent variables. I'm going to have these control variables. Here's how I'm going to set up my series of equations for studying that. You don't have to be this far. But you can come into me with me and have questions about, well, how should I analyze this? Is this technique appropriate? Here are the set of equations I want to look at. Is this the right sequencing of equations that I want to study? How should I look at this? So this is much more an exercise in terms of thinking through your analyses than actually having it all done. If you have had some stuff done, then it'll be helpful because then you say, I try to do this and I hit a wall with that, or I'm not sure how to interpret this, or I'm not sure what my next step is, and that's okay. So we can talk about that during our meeting. If you only have at the point where you can just say, here's what I want to do, then that's great. You can talk through the logic of what you want to do, and make sure that your tests are actually answering your questions, that there's a match there, right? And so we won't meet on Tuesday, so I'll take Tuesday to work on this stuff on Wednesday, and the way I foresee this working then is that on Wednesday and Thursday I'll have meetings with you. Let me go back. This whole sharing thing, I'm still figuring out. Sorry, Jen. I don't know how far you've got through those videos, but I know that
I still have a couple to watch.
they've been quite painful in the making. I'm sure they're quite painful in the review.
Oh, well, a little popcorn, a little alcohol. I'm just kidding.
That's very French of you, so I appreciate that. Right?
A couple baguettes, and it's good to go. One to eat, one to beat myself over the head with,
So, no classes on Tuesday. I want you to complete that working day analysis template. That's on, I think, on today's page for our class session today. And I'll put it on Tuesday's page as well. I'm sure it's elsewhere in Canvas, right? That's in place of data exercise. I guess I should have been number 2 on this time. It's not number 3.
The working data analysis planning template.
Yep, that's up there now.
Today.
On today, okay. So you'll have access. Fill that out in as much detail as possible and bring it with you to our meeting. If you can, send it to me in advance, so I've got a copy as well. But this way you kind of have me on the same page moving forward. Take Tuesday to kind of work through that sort of stuff and look through your data. If there are questions, if you don't know how to recode something, that we can definitely work through that stuff. If you don't know how to handle missing data, you can work through that stuff as well. I can only do 30 minutes meetings during class time if I take Wednesday and Thursday, right? It's 5 to 7:45. I'm good 5 to 8 before I miss my bus. So I can do 3 of you, I can do 6 of you for a half hour, or if I get 3 volunteers who want to meet sometime during the day, Wednesday or Thursday before 5 o'clock, then I could do 3 hours, 3 one-hour sessions with those of you during class time at 5, 6, and 7 on Wednesday, 5, 6, and 7 on Thursday. If we don't have enough questions to fill up that time, that's fine. But I'll do an hour block for each of you. If somebody wants to volunteer to meet before that time, during the day on Wednesday or during the day on Thursday, I'm available. You can figure out time to meet. And if I can get 3 of you to volunteer, then everybody in the class will get an hour session.
Are you gonna be around on 2 o'clock on Thursday?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes.
I could do that.
So talk to me.
Talk to you. Oh, I thought we were like scheduling.
So
it right
not right
now.
now.
I was
So
so
not in the
excited.
class, right? So,
I know.
and I think I saw like 4 hands pop up, so it's great. So it means everybody can get a 1-hour session. And then you guys can tell me what might work best for you, and we'll figure out that. Bring your working data analysis template, bring your SPSS, bring your data, and come prepared with questions. Right? Because the utility of this class isn't the exercises are useful, but it's about what you do with your data set, right? And kind of how you apply it when you're out there in the great void on your own with data that you don't know very well. So I think we need to kind of do that. So I think that's going to replace, and we only got another, week and a half of meeting/class. So I think it's best for us to work on the data rather than spending class and time do exercises on canned data. All right. Questions about this?
When you say bring our SPSS and data, you just want us to bring our computers, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll have mine as well, but this way you can be comfortable in terms of what you're doing. Okay. Other questions? Okay. And your abstracts, right, that are up on Canvas, you're not necessarily tied to that. The idea is that over the next 2 days, right, we will have feedback from your peers to say, have you thought about doing this analytic technique? Or does what you're actually saying you're going to analyze fit with your research question? Or have you thought about this? Or does your data tap that issue? Right? So when you guys give feedback on those, right, you have till Wednesday midnight thing. I said, give detailed feedback. Here's what I think about your asking, or I don't understand your question, or could your question be more general or more specific, right? So think conceptually, think statistically, think in terms of measurement, right? So think about how you can help your peers in terms of those kind of 3 issues here, right? Conceptually, what questions are they asking? Why are they asking those? Think about what they're measuring and how they're measuring those things. And think about the matchup with the analytic techniques and the data and the research questions they're asking, right? So, anything you can kind of help contribute with that, I think would be very helpful. Other questions? I know you all did the data exercise for today. How did that go?
Oh,
There's many peers. I almost threw my laptop through the window. I was trying to do everything in the syntax window before I realized, I don't know why, my brain doesn't work like that, but I could do it in the graphical user interface and then paste it over.
Right.
So the if command wouldn't work. I yelled at statistics a lot.
Okay.
I was very sad, but I finally figured it
And
out.
did that help them doing the GUI and then
It
pasting
did,
it?
and pasting it, but
Okay.
that was a big struggle for me.
Okay.
I don't know why.
That takes time to learn the language really well, especially because I know I emailed a few of you over the weekend, and it really was things like you forgot the period in the command sentence, right? Or you just a variable name.
2 spaces next to each
Or-
other.
2 spaces, which normally doesn't matter unless it's within a certain command sequence.
Right, it's the set of variables, and then it was like, that variable doesn't exist, and like,
Yeah.
right there, I see it. It's spelled out, no, it's not.
So it's those
There's
little
like a
things.
space. Yeah.
Okay, so I get that. Other stuff, other issues.
it was, for me, it was just the exercise in frustration. But what I found helpful was being able to, like, our group, I Zoomed with Mari, we did a Google Doc, I Zoomed with Elle, and everyone kind of had different things to put in. Jesse had a good video that was, but then so what I think, I know I did wrong. I still don't know how to do the filter, but there was a really, I liked the way to make, to change the scale variables, right? I think what I was struggling with was how do you make sense of this, the data, like what is it, what's the goal, right? And so it was easy for me to look at the scale results and say, oh, well, that makes sense. But I didn't know exactly like with the filter, because I didn't quite get there either. I guess if I have a very clear research question,
Right.
it makes it easier to
Right.
kind of visualize what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm moving towards this point, just work with your data, so you have a clear goal. Whereas the early stuff is more about just saying, here's some basic tools, try and see if you can do it. So I get that. I think that's something The next quarter, we'll discuss it a little longer, and we'll have time to work through that sort of stuff. Yeah,
It does.
this is a little thing.
I thought the assignment was really helpful in just practicing syntax and being able to ask everyone for help and knowing they're all doing the same syntax as me, so that it's not like individualized as much. And even though I understand what you're saying about having a research question, because then when I picked my 5 interest variables, none of them went together in a way that would make it nice scale variables. I was like, I'm just gonna do an exercise in sum. And then it became just a syntax exercise, and I just pretended like it had meaning when it didn't, and I didn't analyze it.
Right.
So.
Which is why that's to do with Chrome Excel. It would make no sense.
Right. I was like, this is just gonna have to be a syntax exercise, and I picked the right variables to be scaled together.
Yeah, and that's why for this one it was just a syntax.
Yeah, but I thought it was really helpful to sit down and work on it in class last week, and then work on it over the weekend, and then start actually just typing in syntax and trying. And I feel like I ended the exercise with a lot more confidence in syntax than when I started. So I was thankful for it.
I'd agree with that.
Okay, and I think it's okay to use a bridge for the GUI point and click, and then have paste your syntax. I think the important issue here is reproducibility.
Right.
And having a documentation and a record of everything that you've done. So to the degree that you can do that, whether it's by writing your own syntax or put GUI point and click, that's fine. As you get to more complex sort of stuff, you move away from the GUI stuff and do the syntax. And that's okay, because we're just kind of starting out here. The issues are getting more comfortable in terms of thinking about how the data connect and how you can rework the data for your analysis. All right. So let's see. So if you're still concerned about points from that first exercise, then you can rework the other data set that you're not going to use and complete that preliminary data working plan in more detail to make up those points. All right, and I'll post an assignment to Canvas on that, so you guys can do that. There's that. Some notes here.
Today's the 24th of June.
Mhm.
Sure it is.
Today's the 24th.
John John's birthday is Saturday.
Aw.
All right.
Apparently it's gonna be chocolate with vanilla icing and Spider-Man's on the popsicle. So
Spider-Man's on the popsicle.
somehow I gotta make that happen before Saturday.
You just get a Spider-Man cake and then take a popsicle and just stick it
That's
on
kind
there.
of what I was thinking.
You can make a cake pop, make a popsicle, and then that's its own special cake.
That'll be the birthday boy's cake. You won't get a slice of it.
All right.
Oh,
Cake and popsicles aside, we'll come back.
Nobody's stress eating, no. Not us.
I'm a stress baker. I'm really.
That's quite okay. We don't need healthy
Are you stressed?
/ unhealthy outlets. So that's all right. We'll start from here. So we introduced the idea of notable computation for SPSS last week. So I was going to touch base on that again really quick. Really, SPSS is tricky because it's somewhat limited to the degree to which you kind of do very much implementation, but it does have the option for you. I'll talk about weights today as well, but it's very limited to weights once you pay extra for the other stuff. You're better off using other software for that sort of stuff like Stata or R. But it does do certain things. Multiple implementations we talked about in class is useful for addressing data which are missing at random. Now, we compare that to missing completely at random, missing at random, and not missing at random. And so missing at random just means that data are missing, but they're not depending on the level of the variable on which they're missing. So the example was, if you think about income, and we're missing data on income, we don't want to be missing at one end of the income scale or the other end of the income scale, right? That's completely random with that. It's okay if it's not random in relationship to the other variables in the data set. In fact, you want that to be the case, right? So if it's missing, but it's related to sex or gender in the data, or race ethnicity in the data, or related to levels of education in the data. That's actually good, because multiplication is going to take what we know about the other variables in the data and use those variables to predict the values that are missing in the data that is missing, right? So missing at random means that it shouldn't correlate with the actual variable that it's missing from, but it's okay if it's correlated with the other variables in the data set. And to the degree that it is correlated with those other variables, then you have better estimates of what is actually missing. And so multiple imputation does a random imputation process multiple times with multiple data sets. And you define how many data sets you want to create. The more data you have missing, the more data sets you want to impute. Right? And so by doing this, it's doing a random draw each time it creates a different data set as a starting point. So it's able to make different estimates for each data set on the same missing data. In the end, then, this creates a random sample of distributions of missing data that you can then use for your analysis. Each imputation is independent, and that's key here, right? You've got many independent samples of missing estimates from these data that you can now use to analyze everything. And you then use the pool data from all your data sets. So if you create 10 or 20 data sets, you then use all 20 of those data sets you created in your analyses. So that by doing so, you can use estimates of standard errors, of coefficients, of means, medians, of variance, of all your parameters in your data that you care about. And so that's the benefit of multiple imputation, right? That it's able to use the pool data across all these data sets to make estimates for this. So after this imputation process, right, and I walked you through the logic of how to do this with the GUI in SPSS last week. What it does then is it creates a stacked data file where you have data file number 1 or data set number 1 with imputed data at the top, data set number 2 with imputed data after that, data set number 3 with imputed data, data set number 4 with imputed data, and so on and so forth through data set n, whatever your n was that you have to set at, whether you set at 5, 10, 20, 50, what have you. You have that many data sets, and they're all in one data file. And they're distinguished by a variable that's created by that's called imputation underscore and a number. And that tells you which data set it is in the data file. And it goes from 1 all the way to the maximum number of data sets that you've created.
Is there a, like in SPSS, is it like on utilities? Is there a imputed command?
I'll show you, well, we'll talk about that. So what happens is when you open up imputed data, it recognizes this variable that says imputation underscore whatever the number is, right? And then it highlights with little icons where each of those analyses are for any analysis that's able to do imputed analysis, right? So I couldn't get a picture of it for you on this, but it'll be like linear regression. It'll have a little picture next to it that shows the imputation kind of symbol. That means that it's able to do that sort of stuff. And what it does when you run those analyses, you run them like normal. When you do that, you use your estimates for every single data set that's in that imputed data file. So for data set number 1, you use your estimates based on that analysis. Data set number 2, use your estimates based on that analysis. Data set number 3, estimates based on analysis, and so on and so forth to end. The nice part of that is at the very end, it gives you the pooled estimates, which use all of the data sets in the file. And it's those pooled estimates that you want to use then for your results. Okay? Because what that's then doing is taking the average out of all the data sets you created for all the estimates. It gives you the parameters based on those data sets. And if you go to this link here that I provided for you, it tells you the different types of analysis that are supported for running frequencies, crosstabs, correlations, linear regression, multinomial, binomial regression, all those sorts of things. So you're able to kind of run those data sets. I do not expect you to do any imputation for the assignment for this class. Just to be clear.
This might be a little out of left field, sort of a theory question. we're thinking about the imputations are an average of all of these distributions because they're normally distributed, right? Central. Here.
That's his answer, right?
But if the data set that we're using isn't normally distributed, our actual data, can we do this with something that's highly skewed? Because then we're putting
What do you mean by,
normalized.
what do you mean by the data set is not normally distributed?
Like, say our variable, the missing or the non-missing data that we have is extremely skewed. Can we really calculate missing data using averages for something that's not normally distributed with the data we do have, or am I thinking too hard about this?
So, for example, if you've got like a skewed variable in the data set.
Right, like say I have a variable that's highly skewed to the right, and I have missing data that I want to impute, and I'm doing it with this, with multiple imputations and means. Am I really imputing correctly then if I'm using means to interpret something that's not, or to impute something that's not normally distributed? Am I violating
They're
something?
kind of two different questions.
Okay.
Right? So the variables can be non-normally distributed, but the parameters themselves are still normally distributed.
Okay,
Right?
yeah.
So the idea is that the estimates are unbiased, and you sample it enough, you kind of estimate the whole distribution.
Gotcha.
And that distribution is normally distributed.
Okay, so,
Even if the variables are not. So you're able to do this even when you have a 0-1 variable, which is clearly non-normally distributed.
right,
Or a log variable that has a lot of value at the high end, and very little at the low end, or vice versa.
okay,
Right? And so it's replicating that covariance matrix and it's replicating as it's doing the estimation.
okay, that makes sense.
So, but the estimates, the key here is that each of the parameters, those are normally distributed,
Right,
even when the variables themselves are not.
right, okay,
Right?
yeah.
And I think I specified when I do the estimation in the commands last week that you should move it away from linear estimation to address that issue for each of the variables. I know in other software that I've used, like Stata, you specify what type of variables that you have to address that sort of issue. So that's a good question conceptually to think about. In the case of you guys, for your analysis, you have to think about, well, how much data am I missing? Do I want to just list-wise deletion, or am I able to replace this in some kind of logical way for some of your missing data? So at least before you even leave, get a sense of how much data you're missing and how much of a problem it's going to be. Kind of talk through that a little bit. Okay.
I have a question that you may have answered last week about missing data.
Yeah.
So for example, in a longitudinal study, when you have attrition in your study, how is that something that you would use implementation for, or do you just leave people out in a longitudinal analysis who did the whole thing? Because especially for example, my data set I'm looking at, what are the educational outcomes over time of heritage language speakers? And so if I had students who do not complete, get to the educational outcomes question, that's kind of so I would just exclude the cases that don't.
So it depends why it's missing, right?
Right.
So if they're not getting to the other stuff because they stopped at a certain point,
Right.
they're not really, they didn't put the survey, or they just didn't get that much education.
Right.
Second one?
Well, I guess it could be both, because I need to look at the logbook and find out when did they survey them, because I believe they did survey them in school. And so if they didn't complete high school, for example, they wouldn't have made it to the whatever weight.
Okay. Well, then it's not so much an issue of missing data, it's more an issue of what their maximum score is on that particular variable.
Okay.
So it's not really missing, they just didn't get that particular level.
Right.
So you've got to figure out how to code that so that that's addressed.
Okay.
And so it's not a missing data issue, it's more about how you code your variable and when you want to measure that. Okay. But for some of those techniques, like growth curve analysis, it's based on HLM, and so it uses existing data, so the missing data doesn't matter in those kinds of analyses because of they do maximize the estimation and how they're doing that. So it's a non-issue for a lot of analysis. The bigger issue for those might be more sampling and weighting issues based on the sampling design where they're following longitudinal. You got to get that calculates. And so So SPSS allows you to control for weights on the basic statistical package, right? So we said that, we have problems with our sampling with our data, violating assumptions for most of our analyses if we're missing a lot of data because that's lost information and biases our estimates. But the other problem is if we don't have a random sample of the population, then we've got to account for the kind of complex sampling design, right? So if everybody doesn't have the same probability of being in the sample, we've got to take into account what the probability is. So if your data have weights, please note that in your analytic strategy plan that there is a weight variable or it has weights that you've got to account for, or there's some other issue here at play. Unfortunately, SPSS does allow you to correct for over or resampling with weights. It only does frequency weights for the basic package. So if one person represents 100 people or represents half a person, then it will account for that, and that should come in a variable. But that's all it does, and it only allows you to account for weights with a single variable. So if you've got multiple strata and multiple weights variables with a complex sampling design, then you can't use SPSS for that, at least not with the basic SPSS. You've got to kind of get the complex sampling design addition to that, which of course costs extra money. That's why I like Stata. It's a little more pricey to start, but it's not a year-long membership, and it allows you to do control up to 4 or 5 different weights, different types of weights as well, and in the default.
Stata only run on PC. Or does it run on Mac?
Then you know.
I can Google it.
I mean, I could Google
That's
it.
a
I don't need
person.
you to Google it. Let me Google that for
Please
you,
Google
Shawnee.
it.
I think it runs on Mac.
Yes.
PC.
It should.
It's data for Mac.
Okay, there you go.
Just wondering how much of an investment bank.
I have problems with SPSS on the Mac, just simply. So I don't know with the PC. So it's really easy to use this, right? The GUI, click data, weight, cases, and then you select the variable you want to weight it by. And the syntax itself is very simple. Weight by whatever variable it is that you want to care about, and you write your analysis. And then when you want to turn it off, you say weight off. And then that's all there is to it. So it's able to account for some complex sampling design. If you have a weight variable, then you should definitely do that for your analyses. And you will see estimates change and significance change, even for just frequencies and descriptions based on weight analysis.
If you have a data set open and you're doing your syntax, you just hit run analysis period and it'll run, or do you have to tell what kind of analysis?
If you
No,
want to do
that's
it
just-
shorthand, you would do EXE.
This is just generic.
That's
There is there's no analyses in command. I just
You have to pay extra for SPSS.
that's your
Oh,
question.
that would be really down the shadows to type that in.
Yeah, and I'll have to come to your office. Yeah. No, I just didn't want. I didn't put in like a frequency or crosstabs or OLS or anything like that.
So the data sets that we do have that we're using for our project, will they already have a weight variable in there that they,
Yes.
okay, if they did
They
it?
will specify in the documentation that there are weights or stratified variables or something they need to do.
Okay,
In some cases, with more complex analyses, you are not able to control for the weights because of how the analysis does it. And so in the past, they usually tell you use these control variables. So I was working with ad health data one time, and the weights, we weren't through the weights of the analyses, but you control for the region of the country, for the school, the classrooms, and the population demographic characteristics. And those 4 things allowed you to account for the different probabilities in that.
okay,
as a
like
part of the
demographics or
analysis,
something.
right? And so one thing that not for this, but as you think about working with data sets that are publicly available, people who work with them, with data that you get from the government, is look at prior research with those data sets and look at how they've analyzed those things. And then you can refer back to them and say, okay, they haven't used the weights, but they've accounted for these 5 things, which allows you to take that into account. Okay.
After for the final project, we have to report everything in syntax.
No. For the final product, I don't need to see your syntax. I'll just need to see your write-up. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, I'll talk to you about the presentation. I'll talk more about the write-up next Monday. So the complex sampling module allows you probability and inverse sampling weights. The basic SPSS just does the frequency weights. So I talked about the analysis plan earlier that I want you to start working through, right? At this point, we've talked a lot about cleaning data, right? Diagnosing and addressing missing data. How much do you have? Is it a problem? Is it because of the design of the instrument, so it's not really missing? Is it about how your variable is coded? Is it about something conceptual? Or is it truly missing and you get to do something about it? We talked about how to recode your variables and get them into working shape, right? So thinking about creating scales, doing some kind of transformations, doing z-scores, dummy variables, reverse coding. Did any of you think about reverse coding at all when you created your scales this weekend? Right? As you look at your data, I wanted to make sure I mentioned this. If you are creating these scales, think about the coding. Are they all going in the same direction? Right? So run correlations before you create a scale. Look at those correlations and see if the arrows are all going in the same direction. You need to code things, right? Now with a simple recode command using syntax, you should be able to reverse code a variable fairly easily. You're going from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, from I love it to I hate it, to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now I hate it to I love it. So it's the direction you want it to be, right, for all your scales. So that sort of stuff. Doing dummy variables, we talked about doing z-scores, but you can do any mathematical transformation you want. So you can do a log of a variable, you can do a natural log of a variable, you can exponentiate, you can do subtraction, division, multiplication. You can create interaction terms simply by multiplying two variables together. You can create dummy variables, so you can do all this sort of stuff now to manipulate your data to get into the shape that you want. And so think about those things for your data analysis plan for our meeting. If you have a variable that's in the shape that you're not quite sure what to do with it, and you want to change it to answer your question, then come talk to me with questions, or have a plan for, here's how I want to do this. Does this make sense? Or talk to each other. I think that's the biggest reason. I remember being in grad school. I don't have a PC then, right? So I'm literally in the lab at all hours in the morning and night, and we sit there on talking, hey, here's what I'm doing. And we're literally yelling each other back and forth across the lab, trying to figure this stuff out. And so sometimes it's good to talk through this stuff a little bit. You now know how to run descriptive statistics, right? Frequencies and descriptives, mean, median, mode, skewness, kurtosis, variance, range, standard deviation, all those things. Looking at outliers. Look at all those for your data, right? As you think about preparing for your presentation, you want to have some of this stuff. Here's what my data looks like. Here's who my sample is. Here's who it represents in terms of the population of interest. Here's why it's important. And the more you know that, when things look funny later on, it might give you a hint if something's wrong or something's good. Today we'll talk about bivariate statistics, correlations, crosstabs. We'll think about t-test and ANOVA, but we can get to those as well. And then multivariate statistics. This link here was something I just found, which I thought was nice. Let's see if we can get it to work. Let me do this.
Cheat sheet.
Yes, so you can get to it. If I can get to it, let me do it on here. There we go. Okay, so this website here walks you through the different tests you can do in different software. So I thought this is nice. That you can, and they direct you towards syntax and things to think about for that particular analysis, right? So you think about when it's appropriate to do a independent samples t-test, a paired samples t-test, a one samples t-test, when you might want to do ANOVA, what you might want to do if you don't have continuous variables, if you have like ordinal variables, low, medium, high, and what type of test you want to do for that to compare across two different groups, and that sort of stuff. It even goes up through more multivariate analyses, including ANOVA and simple linear regression, logistic regression, those sorts of things, depending on your dependent variables. So this is a resource here. I have the link for you, I think, on today's page, and it's on the PowerPoint slides for today, which are already up on Canvas. So it's a nice resource. I've been trying to find more stuff for you guys and posting it up there. So if I come across anything else, I'll put it up there for you as well. One second.
Are you live over there?
You feel like another better?
You okay, Jen? Still jet lagged?
Oh, man, I'm recovering from the 10-hour plane ride.
All right.
It's 8-hour difference.
All right, so I didn't ask you to do any reliability stuff for your scale creation this weekend because we're going to make a lot of things available to you. It's more about just looking through the logic of it. You can do Carl-X alpha relatively easy with this. I just did the GUI for this, so you can just kind of cut and paste the syntax. So for reliability numbers, Carl-X alpha, you go to analyze, scale, reliability analysis, and you probably some of you have already used this because you know this. Then you select the variables you want to put into your scale. I'm using data here from a class that, the literacy class I taught where I had the students fill out a literacy survey. So I just pick the variables on there. You won't see any results. Select your variables in there, and then the only thing you have to do is click on statistics, select your statistics, and what I usually pick are the item, scale, and the scale of the item is deleted, and your correlations. And so what that will tell you then is the degree to which the variables that you're putting into your scale are related to each other. It'll give you the alpha for the overall scale to show that if it's if it's a good scale or not, and it'll give you the scale alpha, Carl-X alpha, if that item is deleted from the scale. So you can see how much of an effect that item has on your scale. And in some cases, what you'll see is that your alpha will go up if you remove an item from the scale. Right? If that's the case, then you know that item probably shouldn't be in the scale.
Everything like outlier items and things like that.
Yeah. And if you see, especially here, I always ask you the correlation, because sometimes you forget to recode something in order to reverse code it, and you realize that one of your variables in your scale has a negative correlation to everything else. So it should be in a scale without you first recoding that item to the scale. All right. So fairly straightforward.
What's the guide for the Carl-X alpha? Is it 0.8? What's what number are you looking for reliability?
The higher the better, but I've seen scales as low as 0.6. If it's down below 0.5, then you would. 0.5 and higher, it's workable, or you can still be critiqued. The higher the better.
So when you're picking multiple variables in this, instead of putting all them together in your own scale variable, like we did like with the sum function for the assignment, you're just putting all of them in there, and then
This is not creating a variable for you.
oh, okay. So
What it's
you create,
doing is it's just telling you whether the variables hang together or not for the scale.
oh, okay.
So you can.
Then you can combine them if you want.
So what you can do then is create a factor analysis, right?
Mhm.
Do it and see if they kind of come together, and then create a scale with the factor score. Or you can do like we did and sum them up together into a scale yourself.
Okay. And then, so if you wanted to create like a latent variable of a couple of different survey items or survey variables, you would check this
There's a lot
one.
of you check.
Okay. That makes sense.
So this allows you to check the reliability of the items in the scale that you created now to say they actually do hang. So your question, right? Do they hang together? Is your alpha, Carl-X alpha, high enough for you to put them together to a scale? If it's below 5, it's not defensible, right? If it's above 5, if they seem conceptually they should hang together, you can probably make a good defense for it. If some items are a little weird, then probably not. So it's conceptual and statistical.
So, for example, in my data set, if I wanted to look at age and race together, I would use Carl-X alpha.
Well, you wouldn't put them into one scale together, right?
Maybe two different scales. Oh, I
Those
see.
aren't,
You can't
those aren't
scale
scales,
that.
those are separate variables, right? You gotta think about, so many, what you see this mostly for is attitudinal stuff, right? So
Yeah.
different questions that tap how you feel about school. I think my school is, or when I come to school, I feel like I belong, from totally disagree to completely agree, right? When I come to school, I feel like I am valued as an individual. When I come to school, I feel like my teachers see me. When I come to school, I feel like I'm getting something valuable out of the experience. When I come to school, I love school. Right? So those you can combine, and this allows you to see if they actually hang together, right? So this doesn't create the variable for you. You do that yourself through the syntax or through by combining yourself together. This just tests whether they fit together or not.
Okay.
Other questions about Laravel? All right. Let me see some stuff here. What else we got? And of course, paste your syntax, right? Because then you have a record of all this. Once you've kind of recoded all your variables, you've checked your scales, make sure everything's okay, then once you look at your descriptive statistics, right, you know what your sample looks like, then you can start looking at your correlation analysis, right? And this is really easy to do with the point and click here option. It's just as easy to do with the syntax. It's literally correlations var is equal, and you put your list of variables in there. But the GUI is nice and easy. Again, you go to analyze, go to correlate, go to bivariate. What type of variables are appropriate for correlation? Not,
Variable ratio.
okay, yeah, interval ratio variables. We typically think about it as continuous variables, right? Interval ratio that are based of 0, but interval just means that they're equal distances apart in the way of measuring. But continuous variables are appropriate for this, right? So you wouldn't use things like race in these type of things, and you wouldn't use things like race in the Chromebox alpha reliability analysis either, right? So those are designed for continuous variables. And go through, click options, exclude cases like listwise. Otherwise, it does it pairwise, I think is the default, which means that every coefficient correlation is different depending on how much missing data you have for those particular pairs of variables. You can set the significance level for it, I think the default is 0.05 for correlations. Crosstabs. Crosstabs is not for continuous variables, it's for categorical variables. I actually had a hard time figuring out where they were through this because some of them are statistics. So for crosstabs, you go to descriptive statistics, and then crosstabs, you select your variables for the rows, the columns. I think I usually like to have my predictive variable in the columns and my predictive variable in the rows. So you can think about how you want to do that, because you can specify whether you want the count total, the row total, all the totals, whatever you want.
And I'm sorry, you said crosstabs were for what kind of variable, not continuous?
Categorical variables, right? So this would be the case where you look at sex and race together, right? Or, like looking at offending behavior, arrest or no arrest, right? The difference by sex or by race or what have you. Or high school graduate, not high school graduate, so those non-continuous variables. Once you selected your variables and you want the statistics of interest for yourself, I always like to select the chi-square, because it's nice, easy, interpretable, and the risk statistics. And then it gives you kind of probability of significance from those. It gives you observed counts in each of the cells. And then I always ask for the row and column total. So that way I can look at kind of how the distribution looks like, each of the percents across the rows and down the columns. And again, these are syntax for this. Right, so you now have ways of looking at bi-variable relationship between continuous variables, right, interval ratio variables, and categorical variables, whether they're dichotomous, trichotomous, or what have you. And you know, that nice link that I put together for you tells you about which type of tests are appropriate when you've got more than two categories in categorical variable, or like an ordered variable of some kind, like medium, low, like if your income variable is medium, low, and high, or low SES, medium SES, high SES, then you can look at appropriate tests for that. Regression, point and click. Again, analyze regression and linear. That's what we're going to be squares regression. So that's for your, again, for continuous dependent variables here. Point and click, very straightforward. You have to specify your dependent and independent variables. Not appropriate for categorical variables. And then once you specify those things, the only thing I always go to is statistics. And here you want to specify confidence intervals, so you have them in your regression estimates. I think that's in there. Your model fit. And paste your syntax. Oh, and I always put in my collinearity diagnostics. That'll give you your variance inflation factors and your tolerance levels. And so no matter what analysis I'm running, I always run an OLS regression first, even if the dependent variable doesn't fit an OLS regression. And the reason I do that is because I like to look at the collinearity diagnostics. And so for those statistics, it doesn't care what the dependent variable is. So if you run it for any model you're going to run, you'll always know there's collinearity issues in your variables, even if you're doing a logistic regression later on, or negative binomial regression, or survival analysis. Run it first as an OLS regression, get your collinearity diagnostics, and then you're able to kind of rule out any problems before you do your real analysis. All right, and then binary logistic regression, right? So that's for a 0-1 dependent variable, a yes or no question. That's not appropriate for linear regression. Again, regression here you would have to binary logistic regression, and like I mentioned, even if your variable is they did graduate high school, did not graduate high school, were arrested, not arrested, got a job, didn't get a job. Before you run this, run an OLS regression and check your collinearity diagnostics, because it will still apply to this. You want to rule that stuff out before you get to this point. So this allows you to do 0-1 dependent variables. Again, dependent variables, variables, like your variables, and then select your options. And here, it's under let's see, under options. I always ask for a confidence interval for exponentiating. Those are usually because when you get your results from logistic regression, you get the log odds as the kind of default, and if it's exponential, you talk about the odds ratios instead, or how to do it. It's a little bit better for interpretation from SPSS. So those are just kind of refreshers on the kind of the basic analyses that I think. Looking back through all of your different abstracts, that should hit the high points for everything you guys want to do. I think, early on, on Monday I'll talk a little bit about survival analysis, propensity score analysis, that sort of stuff, but nothing that you'll be doing in class. Just to give you a little taste of what you can do with those sorts of things. But this is the basics for you for what you're doing for this class. So questions about any of the analytic techniques? It's for different dependent variables, right? We talked about collinearity. Let me see. Not sure. On Canvas, I can get to that. Let's see. And the supporting resources. We've got a PDF that from ICPSR, that's a guide for interpreting SPSS output. It'll walk you through the output for all the different examples that we've talked about here. It's annotated here so you can kind of get a sense of, here's how I'm interpreting the outputs, and here's the things I should be looking at in terms of the outputs for the different measures. And it walks you through the descriptive statistics. It walks through the crosstabs and kind of what numbers you're looking at, right? So here's the difference between bilingual children and children who need help in adulthood, right? So it kind of walks you through the basics. It won't look exactly like this because you're requesting different information as based on the defaults, but it tells you, it gives you an idea of kind of how to look for the results. Here it gives you the column and row totals, I think. Column totals. So watch you do that for the crosstabs. How to interpret chi-square results. Independent samples t-tests, paired samples t-tests, analysis of variance, correlation, and OLS regression. Right. So if you need a refresher on the output from SPSS, you have that available there. And then in the southern columns, I'll be available for you next week as well, and go over the results with you once you actually have them. Okay.
Which one is that called?
That is available.
Oh, reading and interpreting SPSS output?
Yep. It's in the supporting resources page. I think I put it on today's page as well. Right? Okay. Yeah. So it's on there. I thought I found another one, but I may not put it up yet, that gives you annotations for reading output as well. So if I can find that one, I'll put that one up there for you as well. All right, so let's know they're both on here, right? Look it up. What analysis goes with what and the variable, how to interpret your output from SPSS. Those are all there for you. And then looking forward to your presentations for class, right? That's Wednesday, July 3rd, the last day of class. This is going to be the basic framework for your write-up as well, but this is just for you to start thinking about the presentation, right? So you'll each have 10 minutes to present. This is 90 minutes, right? So supposedly like 10 to 15 minutes to present, no more than that. And this is you don't have to have a very in-depth literature review, but give us a sense of what your research focus is and kind of how it's based in prior literature. It's really brief here, doesn't be very detailed. It's about theory and prior literature, so it's based in something. And that way, you kind of set your research questions. So we have a sense of kind of why you're asking the questions you're asking. This doesn't have to be a very in-detailed literature review, but this gives a sense of kind of why you're doing what you're doing, what your interest is in answering those questions. What guided your choice of data sets and variables? And for that, it's real straightforward, right? Think about, well, what population does your data set have? What type of information does it have? How is it appropriate to address the research question that you're using at? And why is it a good fit for what you're doing? So making the rationale for why you're doing this. What did you do to prep for your analysis? Here's really kind of talk about your variables, right? I created these variables. Here's how I created these variables. Here's why, here's the variables that are available to me in this data set. here's my dependent variable, here's my independent variables, here's controls that I want to have on there. So all this stuff you do in a normal presentation. The additional point here is, talk a little bit of the challenges you came across or issues or stuff that you're thinking about with some of that stuff, just to kind of help each other out. And then results. I know that these are preliminary results. It might not be the perfect analysis that you want, but at least give us a sense of kind of where you are at the analysis, right? So provide univariate statistics. Like, here's what my sample looks like. Here's some of the characteristics of the sample. Here's what we know about the dependent variable. Look at my variance statistics. Say, here's some basic relationships that are really important here. Here's what they look like in the bivariate analysis, and here's how they change in the multivariate analysis. But once we control for other things, here's the bigger story, and here's how these things answer my research questions. You can organize it just as univariate, bivariate, multivariate, or you do univariate, and then say, here's research question number 1, and here's what I see in bivariate and multivariate. But answering your questions. And then what are your next steps? You've got more data cleaning to do. You've got to figure out the variables. I think I've got to change the analyses. What have you.
How many minutes do you want to talk?
10 to 15. Right? So there's 9 of us. So we have about 3 hours or so. So we should have everybody. And so it's really brief. And so for your write-up, right, that'll be, and what I'm thinking for the write-up is that we won't have that due at the end of the class. I'll give you maybe 2 to 3 weeks to figure out what the windows will look like, what they'll let me do, where you actually write this up. And it would be not so much as the first one, right, literature review, that would be like a page or 2 where you set up your research question, and then you give me details on the rest of it, right? Your data, how you create your variables, your methods, your findings, and what your findings are. So, but I'll give you more detail for that next week. When that will be due.
Will you be available during those 2 to 3 weeks to meet with us?
Via Zoom.
Via Zoom.
Via Zoom. Let's see. And then we talked about the meeting with media for presentation prep. All right. So that's where we're at for today. Just talk about anything else here. The working data analysis planning templates available on today's Canvas page, right?
That's our new one.
Yep, that's the new one. It's more detailed. So go through that. Let me know if you have any questions. Work on that for the next couple of days. Let's see, interpreting. I've got some links there for more stuff on imputed data. If you're interested in that, that's available for you there. But at this point, you need to be working your data sets and setting things up for your analysis for your presentation. So we'll leave it at that. All right, and that's all I have for today. So if you want to rework your preliminary data analysis plan, right, go with the data set that you're not using for this, just because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, and that other thing, and rework that with more detail. For our meetings for Wednesday and Thursday, do this working data analysis planning template that I put up here on the campus page for today, and that's much more detailed. Get through as much of that as you can before we meet, and that's mostly just as utilities in terms of, if you have questions or concerns, you can kind of work through the logic of what you're doing and how you work through it or what you're proposing. All right.
How do you want to schedule those? Do you want to have like a sign-up sheet, or do you want to split it best to just email you individually? Or?
I'll say if you guys know you want to meet outside of class now you guys can come up and talk to me. And so I'll write things down and give you a sense of availability. If you're going to meet during class times, then I know Jesse and Ella are not here today, so I want to give them a chance too. So then I'll take your name. I'll have your names down for in-class time meetings, and I'll schedule you Wednesday or Thursday. If for some reason you can't do one or the other, then please let me know today. And we'll figure it out. But otherwise, go have some fun with data.
I'm trying to be funny.
I like how you said that, and now for the fun stuff at the bottom of the analysis sheet. I was like, oh, good, a reminder.
And now for the fun stuff.
Oh, this is fun.
I mean, I've already been using it for other data sets, so it is fun.
You did, it's cool. It's a good way to do it.
I'm just